Moran adjusted his slate-gray uniform for the third time in 10 minutes, smoothing down the ceremonial ridges that marked his rank in the Zephyrian Intelligence Corps. 27 years of service. 27 years of breaking down the most stubborn minds in the galaxy. And now? Now they wanted him to handle a human. A human. He almost laughed at the absurdity. The command structure at Nexus 7 must have been running low on junior officers if they were assigning him to babysit some primitive Earth dweller. Still, orders were orders, and Moran had built his reputation on being thorough, methodical, and absolutely, positively unbeatable when it came to extracting information. The detention facility hummed with its usual mechanical precision around him. Level 7 housed the most dangerous criminals in this sector, warlords from the Andromedan conflict, rogue artificial intelligences, and that one particularly nasty individual who had somehow convinced an entire planet to worship his pet fish. But today, Cell Block Z was reserved for their latest guest, Amy Kowalski. Even her name sounded ridiculous. What kind of species gave their offspring combinations of sounds that had no logical pattern? At least Zephyrian names followed proper mathematical sequences. His own name, Moran, translated to 7.4 efficiency rating in the old tongue. It meant something. It had weight. But Amy Kowalski? It sounded like someone had sneezed while trying to pronounce a grocery list. The transport pod arrived with a soft hiss, and Moran straightened his shoulders. Time to show this human how professionals conducted business. The security detailed 2 hulking Gorathians who could probably bench press a small moon flanked the prisoner as she stepped out. Moran blinked. She looked ordinary. Disappointingly ordinary. About average height for her species, brown hair pulled back in some kind of functional arrangement, wearing what appeared to be a standard-issue jumpsuit. No cybernetic enhancements, no visible weapons, no aura of barely contained violence. Just a regular female human who looked like she might ask him for directions to the nearest bathroom. This was their dangerous prisoner? The Gorathians nudged her forward, their massive clawed hands hovering near her shoulders without quite touching. Standard protocol for handling unpredictable species. Moran had read the briefings, of course. Humans were supposedly capable of extreme emotional swings, irrational decision-making, and something called going postal, which the xenobiology department still hadn't adequately explained. Amy Kowalski walked into Interrogation Room 12 with the casual stride of someone entering a coffee shop. She glanced around at the reinforced walls, the neural dampening fields, and the array of psychological pressure devices with what could only be described as mild interest. "Cozy," she said, and sat down in the designated chair without being asked. Moran felt his confidence waver for exactly 2.7 seconds before reasserting itself. Clearly, the human didn't understand the gravity of her situation. That was fine. That was expected. Most species went through a brief period of denial before reality set in. He activated his recording device, pulled up his standard interrogation protocols on his datapad, and settled into his own chair across from her. The metal table between them gleamed under the harsh lighting, its surface designed to be uncomfortably reflective and psychologically disorienting. Amy examined her fingernails. "Amy Kowalski," Moran began, his voice carrying the proper tone of authority he'd perfected over decades of service. "You have been detained under Galactic Security Provision 77 Alpha for suspected espionage, unlawful entry into restricted space, and failure to comply with traffic control directives." She looked up at him with brown eyes that showed no trace of fear, anger, or even concern. If anything, she looked mildly curious, like he had just told her about his weekend plans. "Traffic control directives?" she asked, raising one eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it?" Moran felt a small twitch in his left temple. Human psychology was supposed to be simple, fear-based, emotional, completely predictable once you understood their primitive fight or flight responses. He had studied their behavioral patterns extensively. Humans were supposed to either become aggressive and demanding, or collapse into pleading and bargaining. They were not supposed to treat galactic security charges like a minor inconvenience. "You will answer my questions directly and completely," he continued, sticking to the script. Your cooperation will be noted in your official record. Amy nodded seriously. Oh, absolutely. I'm very cooperative. Ask anyone. There was something in her tone, something that suggested she was enjoying herself, that made Moran's confidence crack just a little bit more. But he was a professional. He had handled worse than one mildly sarcastic human female. At least he thought he had. Moran began with Protocol Alpha 7, the standard information extraction technique that had worked flawlessly on 94.6% of all subjects. He leaned forward slightly, establishing dominance through body language, and fixed Amy with what his instructors had called the stare of inevitable truth. Let's start with something simple, he said, his voice carrying the proper undertones of authority and barely contained impatience. State your name, species designation, and planet of origin. Amy tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question from multiple philosophical angles. Well, my name is Amy Kowalski, though my friends call me Kowalski, or sometimes just hey you when they're feeling informal. Species designation? I mean, I'm human, obviously. Though I did have a DNA test done once that said I was 3% Neanderthal. Which explains my stubbornness according to my mother. And planet of origin would be Earth, third rock from the sun, you know the one. Moran stared at her. The response contained the requested information, technically speaking, but it was wrapped in so much unnecessary detail that his brain felt slightly bruised trying to process it all. Your ship's identification codes, he continued, consulting his datapad with renewed determination. Oh, that would be Sierra Kilo 77 Charlie. Though honestly, the registration department really needs to work on their naming conventions. I mean, Sierra Kilo 77 Charlie? It sounds like a discount furniture store having an identity crisis. The twitch in Moran's temple intensified. He made a note to check his blood pressure later. What was your mission in restricted space? Amy's expression brightened, as if he'd just asked about her favorite hobby. Mission? Oh, that's generous. I was delivering a shipment of decorative plant holders to Station Gamma Prime. You know, those little ceramic things that look like tiny alien heads? Apparently. They're all the rage in the outer colonies. Who knew that miniature pottery shaped like your species would be such a hit? Plant holders. Moran repeated the words slowly, hoping they would make more sense the second time. Yep, 3,000 units of them. Though between you and me, I think whoever designed them was working from some pretty outdated references. I mean, the proportions are all wrong, and don't get me started on the color scheme. Moran felt something inside his chest that might have been panic, but he pushed it down ruthlessly. This was just the opening phase. Humans were probably naturally verbose. Once he applied proper pressure, she would crack like an eggshell. He activated the psychological stress inductors. The room's lighting shifted to a harsh, flickering pattern designed to trigger anxiety responses in most sentient species. The temperature dropped by precisely 4 degrees. Low-frequency sound waves, just below the threshold of conscious hearing, began pulsing through the walls. Amy glanced around with mild interest. Oh, that's new? Is this supposed to be intimidating? Because I have to tell you, my apartment's heating system does something similar every winter, though yours is more consistent. My landlord could learn something from this setup. The stress inductors were working perfectly. Moran's instruments showed optimal psychological pressure levels. Every other species in the galaxy would be experiencing elevated heart rates, increased perspiration, and the overwhelming urge to confess every minor transgression they'd ever committed. Amy looked like she was evaluating the room's interior design choices. Perhaps, Moran said, his voice taking on the cold, clinical tone that had broken hardened criminals across 17 star systems, you don't understand the severity of your situation. You are being held under the authority of the Galactic Security Council. Your fate rests entirely in my hands. Amy nodded thoughtfully. That does sound serious. Though I have to ask, is there a complaint department? Because I'm pretty sure there's been some kind of mix-up. I mean, I'm flattered that you think I'm important enough for all this. She gestured around the room, but I'm literally just a cargo pilot who took a wrong turn at the Betelgeuse Junction. Wrong turn. Moran's voice was flat. Yeah, you know how it is. GPS systems in space are terrible. 1 minute you're following the yellow line to Gamma Prime. Next minute you're in restricted space with a bunch of very polite security officers asking you to please power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Moran consulted his data pad again, desperate for guidance. Protocol Beta 9 suggested escalating to physical intimidation. Protocol Gamma 12 recommended psychological manipulation through carefully constructed false scenarios. Protocol Delta 4 involved bringing in a second interrogator to play the role of sympathetic colleague. All of these protocols assumed the subject would respond to intimidation like a normal, rational being. Amy Kowalski was apparently immune to normal, rational psychology. You claim this was an accident, Moran said, grasping for some thread of logic he could follow. Oh, absolutely. Though honestly, your restricted space isn't very well marked. I mean, there were some signs, but they were in Zephyrian script, and my universal translator was having one of its off days. It kept translating everything as beware of leopard, which didn't seem right. Beware of leopard? Yeah, I know, right? I think it needs a software update. Either that, or this sector of space has a serious predatory cat problem that nobody talks about. Moran realized, with a growing sense of horror, that he had absolutely no idea what to do with this human. 3 hours. 3 entire hours of this nonsense, and Amy Kowalski was still sitting there like she was waiting for her appointment at a pleasant medical clinic. She had somehow managed to turn his expertly crafted interrogation into what felt like the galaxy's most frustrating small-talk session. Moran's patience, carefully cultivated over decades of professional service, finally snapped like a twig in a hurricane. Enough, he roared, slamming his hands on the metal table with enough force to make it ring like a bell. I don't care about your faulty translator. I don't care about your landlord's heating problems. I don't care about decorative plant holders. Amy blinked at him with those infuriatingly calm brown eyes. Okay, but just so you know, the plant holders are actually pretty cute once you get past the weird proportions. There's this one design that looks like a tiny version of you, actually. Same ridge pattern and everything. That did it. Moran stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. Yeah. Grabbed the heavy interrogation chair from the corner of the room, the one designed for subjects who required physical restraints, and hurled it directly at Amy's head with every ounce of his considerable Zephyrian strength. It was a move born of pure desperation, not part of any protocol. Not sanctioned by any manual. Just the primal need to break through her impossible composure and get some kind of emotional response that made sense in the known universe. The chair sailed through the air in a perfect arc, spinning slowly, its metal frame gleaming under the harsh lights. It was heavy enough to knock out a Gorathian, fast enough to surprise a Velocian scout, and absolutely guaranteed to shatter whatever weird bubble of calm this human had wrapped around herself. Amy glanced up at the incoming projectile with mild interest. Then, and Moran would spend the rest of his career trying to explain this to skeptical colleagues, she stood up, rotated precisely 90 degrees, and sat down in the chair while it was still flying through the air. The chair, with Amy now occupying it, completed its trajectory and landed gently on the floor with a soft thud. Amy settled back into the cushions, tested the armrests with her elbows, and nodded approvingly. Oh, this one's much more comfortable, she said conversationally. Better lumbar support. Though the color scheme still clashes with the room's aesthetic. Moran's brain made a sound like a computer trying to divide by zero. He stared at her. He stared at the chair. He stared at the space where the chair had been flying 3 seconds earlier. He performed rapid calculations in his head, checking the laws of physics, momentum, gravitational constants, and basic cause and effect relationships. None of it made sense. How? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the detention facility's life support systems. Did you do that? Amy looked puzzled. Do what? You sat in a flying chair. Oh, that. She waved a hand dismissively. Basic reflexes. You looked like you were having some kind of episode. so I figured I should get out of the way. But waste not, want not, you know. It looked like a perfectly good chair. Reflexes, Moran repeated numbly. Yeah, humans are pretty good at that kind of thing. Split-second decisions, adapting to changing circumstances, making the best of weird situations. It's kind of our specialty. The door to Interrogation Room 12 burst open, and half the security staff of Nexus 7 poured in. Apparently, someone had been monitoring the situation, and the sound of Moran's frustrated roar followed by sudden silence had triggered emergency protocols. Sir, gasped Lieutenant Korvac, a young Andromedan whose spots were flashing in patterns that indicated extreme concern. We heard shouting, and then, are you all right? Moran pointed at Amy with a shaking finger. She sat in the chair while it was flying. The security team exchanged glances. Lieutenant Korvac cleared his throat diplomatically. Sir, perhaps you should take a break. Interrogating humans can be stressful. I threw a chair at her head, Moran said, his voice rising to a near-hysteria pitch. A full-sized interrogation chair, with intent to cause harm, and she sat in it, in mid-air, while it was moving. More security personnel had arrived. Word was spreading through the facility like wildfire. Moran could see faces pressing against the observation window, alien eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. Chief Security Officer Vexnarg, a massive insectoid whose compound eyes missed nothing, pushed through the crowd. What exactly happened here? I can show you the security footage, offered Technician Plark from somewhere in the back of the growing crowd. No, Moran said firmly. Don't show anyone the security footage, ever. File it under Level 7 classified and pretend this never happened. Amy raised her hand like a student in class. Actually, could I get a copy? My friends back home would never believe this story without proof. The entire room fell silent. Your friends, Chief Vexnarg said slowly, would find this behavior normal? Amy shrugged. Well, maybe not normal exactly, but not completely crazy either. I mean, Sarah once caught a falling television while doing a backflip off a diving board. And my cousin Mike has this thing where he can dodge raindrops while riding a motorcycle. It's all about spatial awareness and reaction time. Dodge raindrops, Lieutenant Korvac whispered, while riding a motorcycle. Right? Humans are weird like that? We're really good at the impossible stuff, but we can't figure out how to fold fitted sheets properly. Moran sank into his original chair, defeated. Around him, some of the galaxy's most experienced security professionals stared at Amy Kowalski like she had just explained how she regularly violated the fundamental laws of reality as a weekend hobby. This is why, she continued cheerfully, I probably shouldn't be in restricted space without proper navigation equipment. We tend to adapt a little too well to unexpected situations. It makes us terrible at following standard procedures. Chief Vexnarg made a note on his datapad. Moran was fairly certain it read something along the lines of reassign all human-related cases to someone else. But immediately, within an hour, Commander Tom Malley arrived from the upper command levels, in his pristine uniform bearing the kind of decorations that suggested he had personally wrestled black holes into submission. Malley was what the Galactic Security Forces called a specialist. The kind of interrogator they brought in when standard protocols had failed so spectacularly that reality itself seemed to be having technical difficulties. He swept into Interrogation Room 12 like a force of nature, radiating the sort of confidence that came from never having encountered a problem he couldn't solve with the proper application of advanced psychology and intimidation techniques. Amy looked up from where she was still sitting in the chair she had somehow commandeered mid-flight. Oh, hello! Are you here for the show too? Malley paused. He glanced at Moran, who was slumped in the corner looking like he had stared too long into the abyss and discovered it was making silly faces back at him. He glanced at the security footage that was apparently playing on repeat on someone's datapad. He glanced back at Amy, who waved cheerfully. I am Commander Malley, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I specialize in extracting information from difficult subjects. Oh, that sounds interesting. What kind of information are you looking for? Because honestly, I'm pretty much an open book. Ask me anything. Molly activated Protocol Omega Prime, the most advanced psychological pressure system in the Galactic security arsenal. The room's environmental controls shifted to create a sensory experience designed to break down mental barriers through carefully calibrated discomfort. Temperature fluctuations, subsonic frequencies, electromagnetic field variations, and holographic projections combined to create what the technical manual described as unavoidable psychological compliance conditioning. Amy glanced around at the swirling lights and shifting shadows. Wow, this is like a really expensive nightclub. Do you guys do birthday parties? Commander Molly's left eye began to twitch. Perhaps, he said, consulting his own advanced datapad, we should start with why you were in restricted space in the first place. Oh, that's easy, Amy said, settling back into her commandeered chair like she was preparing to tell a campfire story. I was supposed to deliver those plant holders to Station Gamma Prime, but I took a wrong turn at the Betelgeuse Junction because my navigation system was acting up. You know how it is with discount space GPS, you get what you pay for. And what exactly prompted this wrong turn? Amy's expression became slightly sheepish. Well, there was this really interesting nebula off to the left, and I thought maybe I could get some good photos for my travel blog. So I adjusted course just a tiny bit to get a better angle and somehow ended up in your restricted space. Which, by the way, has some fantastic views. You should really consider opening it up for tourism. Molly stared at her. You violated galactic security protocols for photographs? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds bad. But they were going to be really good photographs. My blog followers love nebula shots. I've got almost 12 subscribers now. The environmental controls were now operating at maximum intensity. The psychological pressure readings showed levels that should have reduced most sentient beings to quivering, confessing masses of terror. Amy appeared to be enjoying the light show. Lieutenant Korvac leaned over to whisper in Molly's ear. Sir, we've reviewed the initial charges. The subject was cited for improper lane usage in a shipping corridor. Improper lane usage, Molly repeated slowly, and failure to signal before changing course. Failure to signal. Also, her registration was expired by 3 days. Molly felt something inside his brain that might have been a small aneurysm. We have deployed the full resources of a Level 7 security facility, engaged 2 senior interrogation specialists, and activated Omega Prime psychological conditioning for expired registration? Amy raised her hand again. Actually, I tried to renew it online, but the website was down. And the renewal office on Mars Station was closed for renovation. I was planning to take care of it as soon as I got to Gamma Prime. The website was down, Molly said faintly. Yeah, government websites, you know. They're terrible everywhere, not just on Earth. At least yours have nice graphics. The renewal forms back home look like they were designed in the Stone Age. Behind them, Moran let out a sound that might have been laughter, or might have been the final breakdown of his sanity. Chief Vexnarg was making notes that were definitely about early retirement options. Commander Mali, who had broken the will of warlords and made artificial intelligences weep for mercy, he found himself staring at a human female who had just compared galactic security violations to bad web design. This is unprecedented, he whispered to himself. What was that? Amy asked brightly. Nothing, Molly said quickly. Nothing at all. The growing crowd of security personnel watching through the observation window had tripled in size. Someone was taking bets on whether Amy would somehow manage to redecorate the entire interrogation facility through sheer force of personality. Molly consulted his datapad one more time, hoping to find some protocol, any protocol, that could help him deal with a subject who treated maximum security detention like a casual social visit. There wasn't one. Humans, he realized with dawning horror, were not supposed to exist. The situation had escalated so far beyond normal parameters that Admiral Vashy herself materialized in Interrogation Room 12 via emergency transport. The Admiral Vashy, whose reputation for handling galactic crises was so legendary that entire star systems had surrendered rather than face her disapproval. She surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of someone who had personally negotiated peace treaties with sentient gas clouds and convinced black holes to relocate for the greater good. Her presence immediately commanded absolute silence from everyone except Amy, who looked up with genuine delight. "Oh wow, another one. Are you here for the chair thing too? Because honestly, that wasn't even my best work. You should have seen what I did with a falling piano on Tau Ceti." Admiral Vashy blinked slowly. In her 3 centuries of service, she had faced down cosmic horrors that drove lesser beings mad, but she had never encountered anything quite like this cheerful human female who apparently treated furniture as mid-air transportation. "I am Admiral Vashy," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who could probably order stars to rearrange themselves into more pleasing patterns. "I have been informed that we have a situation." "Situation might be a strong word," Amy said thoughtfully. "I mean, it's really just a misunderstanding about traffic laws. Though I have to say, your security response time is impressive. Very thorough." The Admiral turned to Commander Mali, who looked like he was questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. Report. The subject, Mali began, consulting his notes with the desperate precision of someone clinging to protocol like a life preserver, was detained for minor shipping violations. Expired registration, improper lane usage, failure to signal. Standard fines totaling approximately 47 credits. 47 credits, Admiral Vashy repeated. However, Mali continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone reporting that gravity had stopped working. The subject has demonstrated capabilities that appear to violate several fundamental laws of physics and psychology. Amy waved from her commandeered chair. "I really don't think they're that fundamental. More like guidelines, really." Admiral Vashy studied Amy with the intensity she usually reserved for analyzing the tactical weaknesses of enemy fleets. Here was a being who had somehow reduced 2 of the galaxy's most experienced interrogators to gibbering confusion, who had treated maximum security psychological conditioning like entertainment, and who had performed a feat of aerial furniture navigation that defied rational explanation, all for expired registration. "Miss Kowalski," the Admiral said carefully, "are you, in fact, just a cargo pilot who took a wrong turn?" "Pretty much, yeah, though I prefer independent freight logistics specialist. It sounds more professional on my business cards." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Around her, Ace, the cream of Galactic security forces, waited for guidance on how to handle a threat that wasn't actually threatening anything except their understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. "Release her," Admiral Vashy said finally. "Sir?" Lieutenant Korvac squeaked. "Give her a standard citation for the registration violation. 47 credits, plus processing fees, and perhaps a recommendation to update her navigation systems." Amy clapped her hands together. "Oh, that's very reasonable. Do you take credit cards? Because I'm not sure I have that much cash on me." 20 minutes later, Amy Kowalski walked out of the most secure detention facility in the sector with a traffic ticket and a cheerful wave goodbye. She paused at the exit to compliment the security staff on their professionalism and ask if they knew any good restaurants in the area. The door sealed behind her with a final, decisive hiss. The assembled security personnel stood in complete silence, trying to process what had just happened. 3 hours later, Moran sat alone in his office, staring at a blank incident report form. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but every time he tried to type what had actually occurred, the words seemed to rearrange themselves into something that sounded like the ravings of someone who had been exposed to too much cosmic radiation. Finally, he typed, "Human subject detained for routine violations. Subject released after standard processing. No unusual incidents to report." He filed the report, locked his office, and went home to seriously reconsider his career choices. The chair sat in storage, tagged as evidence that no one would ever request.